Today we explore a story that locals avoid discussing. I will show you Mara's steps into the fog-shrouded fields of her lost home. This phenomenon, the rising whispers from the earth, conceals a terrifying pull of erased memories. No one leaves unchanged. Let's begin. Mara's boots sank into the cracked earth, the soil parting like old wounds under her weight. The fog clung low, a damp veil that muffled the world, carrying the faint, metallic tang of forgotten rain. She paused at the edge of the village path, where the first empty huts loomed, roofs sagging, windows blind with dust. Ravens called from afar, their cries sharp echoes slicing the hush, pulling at threads of memory she had long tried to sever. She moved forward, drawn by a compulsion she couldn't name, toward the fields that bordered the ruins. The air grew thicker here, pressing against her skin like a held breath. Silence wrapped her at first, absolute and heavy, broken only by the soft crunch of her steps. But as the dead stalks rose around her, twisted, black-veined remnants of what was once golden wheat, the quiet shifted. A whisper stirred, faint as wind through dry reeds, rising from the ground itself. Mara knelt, fingers brushing the soil, searching for any sign. A shard of pottery, a buried tool, something to anchor the stories her family had fled. The field seemed to watch, its expanse stretching under the gray dawn, unresponsive yet alive, with subtle hunger. She pushed deeper, parting the brittle undergrowth until her hand closed around it. A withered sheaf, its head shrunken and gray, bundled as if by some forgotten hand. It crumbled slightly in her grip, releasing a puff of dust that tasted of ash and regret. The whispers grew, not words, but murmurs, threading through the stalks like veins pulsing beneath the earth. They tugged at her, urging her to listen, to remember what she had left behind. Her pulse quickened, a quiet tension coiling in her chest. Not fear, but the slow grind of unease, as if the land itself demanded she stay, unearth what silence had buried. From the shadow of a distant barn, two figures emerged. Nora, her silhouette sharp against the mist, arms crossed like barriers. Elias, hunched and peering, his eyes catching hers with wary recognition. They had seen her return, this ghost of a daughter, stepping back into the blight's embrace. If she turned away now, kept her silence, who would speak for the fields? Who would name the rot before it claimed them all? As the morning wore on, the mist clung low over the fields, a veil of gray that turned the air thick and tasting of rust. Nora's eyes, sharp as flint, traced Mara's face, pausing on the faint lines etched by years away. They stood at the edge of the herb patch, where twisted stalks pushed through black soil like desperate fingers. Nora knelt, her calloused hands parting the undergrowth, revealing clumps of feverfew and nightshade, their leaves veined with an unnatural pallor. "These," Nora murmured, her voice a low rasp against the wind's sigh. "They bind the pain right into the earth. Roots drink the sorrow we pour out, or try to bury." She plucked a stem, crushing it between fingers. A bitter scent bloomed, sharp as old blood, mingling with the dry earth tang that coated Mara's tongue. The sensation crawled up her skin, a prickling awareness of the ground beneath her boots, alive and listening. Mara shifted, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the plain blurred into fog. Doubt coiled in her chest, heavy as the guilt she'd carried since leaving. Nora's questions had started soft, probing the edges of the past. Why had her family fled so suddenly? What whispers had they ignored in the night? Mara had answered with silences, each one a wall. But now Nora straightened, her stare unyielding. "The ritual, Mara. Your kin were there when it broke. They knew the words to seal it, the ones that feed the land truth instead of lies. Why won't you say it? The words hung unanswered. Mara opened her mouth, but nothing came. Her throat tightened like parched soil. The field stirred in response. A faint rustle, then whispers. Not wind, but voices. Fragmented murmurs rising from the stalks. Forgot. Left us, hollow. They slithered through the air, brushing Mara's ears like cold breath, sending a shiver down her spine without tipping into fear. Just the weight of it. The soil's quiet accusation vibrating underfoot. Nora led her deeper into the patch, boots sinking into the soft, yielding earth. The whispers grew, a chorus of half-heard pleas, and the mist thickened around them, coiling like smoke from unseen fires. Nora paused, pulling something from her apron. A small clay bell, cracked but whole, its surface etched with faded runes. She held it out, the weight of it evident in her steady grip. This rang once during the rite. Only truth makes it sing now. Mara's hand trembled as she took it, the cool clay warming against her palm, heavy with unspoken echoes. The doubt cracked, just a fracture. Her voice broke through, restrained, barely above the field's murmur. My family knew more. They saw the shade rising, the hunger in the roots. But they ran, said it wasn't theirs to fix. Nora's eyes softened, the hard lines easing as she watched the toll Mara's admission took, the voice fracturing like dry twigs. She placed a hand on Mara's shoulder, light as a shared secret. Then let's remember together. The land's waiting for words that match the ache. The whispers faded, but the question lingered in the air, unanswered. What truth hid beneath these herbs, waiting to root or rot? Mara clutched the bell, a restrained readiness stirring, the soil's pulse sinking with her own hesitant breath. By midday, the fog clung to the barn's splintered eaves like a shroud, muting the dawn's gray light. Mara stood at the threshold, her boots sinking into the soft, ashen earth, watching Elias Crane's gaunt frame hunch over the warped table inside. His fingers, knotted with age and regret, traced invisible lines on the wood as if mapping memories too heavy to hold. Nora lingered in the doorway, her herbalist's satchel slung low, eyes sharp but silent. Waiting, always waiting for the words that fed the soil. Elias's voice came first, a rasp like wind through dry stalks. I buried them, Mara. The chronicles, the ones that speak of the ritual. He paused, his gaze drifting to the fields beyond, where the mist coiled thicker now, whispering secrets to the twisted sheaves. Tiredness etched his face, lines deepening like furrows in fallow ground. I thought hiding them would keep the shade at bay. Silence, you see, it starves the truth, but it feeds her hunger too. Mara's mind turned inward, thoughts circling the weight of his confession. Why now? After years of evasion, this reluctant unraveling. She felt the pull of flight, the old instinct to turn from the village's ghosts. But something in his weariness anchored her. The fields seemed to lean in, their faint murmurs rising, a susurrus of voices, half-formed pleas from the black-dusted plain. Elias's fear mirrored her own buried guilt. What if the pages, once unearthed, summoned more than words? What if they dragged her family's silence into the light, exposing the interrupted rite that had let the blight take root? He straightened slightly, resolve hardening in his eyes, despite the exhaustion pulling at his shoulders. Under the old oak by the ritual stone, the one with the cracked bell at its base. Dig there. But be careful. The truth in those leaves, It might call her stronger. His hand trembled as he pointed toward the heartland, where the mist thickened, veiling the distant silhouette that was the harvest shade. Nora stepped forward then, her voice steady, bridging the gap. We've let silence root too deep, Elias. Time to share the memory. Trust flickered between them, fragile as a new shoot, Elias nodding, finally yielding what he'd guarded alone. Mara's pulse quickened, not with panic, but a quiet resolve blooming through the fatigue. She nodded, voice firming as she met his gaze. I'll find them. The clay bell, half buried in her thoughts from Nora's tales, surfaced now. Its muted ring, a promise of truths spoken aloud. But as the field's whispers grew, brushing her skin like unanswered echoes, one question lingered, heavy in the air. Could she bear the weight of those confined sheets? The past they'd all conspired to forget. As the afternoon deepened, the farmstead sagged under the weight of forgotten seasons, its weathered porch creaking like a sigh in the fog-laden dawn. Mara sat on the edge of a splintered bench, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood, as if it might anchor her against the pull of the fields beyond. The two elders, old Tom with his rheumy eyes, and Lena, her shawl drawn tight against the chill, huddled closer, their voices low, threaded with the rasp of dust-choked lungs. It started after the last harvest, Tom murmured, eyes flicking to the black plain where twisted stalks clawed at the sky. Whispers from the soil itself. Not wind, mind you. Voices, promising ease. If we just kept quiet. Said the price of speaking was steeper. The land would take more than crops. Lena nodded, her gnarled hands twisting a withered sheaf she'd plucked from the edge of the yard. They promised forgetfulness, a quiet end. But silence feeds it, girl. We've paid in echoes ever since. Mara's breath caught, doubt coiling in her chest like the mist beginning to rise from the fields. She wanted to flee, to let the guilt of her family's long-ago departures swallow her whole again. But curiosity tugged, sharp as a thorn, drawing her gaze outward. The air tasted of copper and decay, and in the distance, ravens wheeled with distant tolls that might have been bells or warnings. As Tom leaned in, his words painting the voices, soft enticements of rest, of no more blame, the mist thickened, unbidden. It swirled low over the furrows, tendrils curling like fingers toward a shadowed copse at the field's far end. Not random. It seemed to listen, to respond to their shared breath. The elders noticed too, their faces paling, but they didn't pull away. We've held this in too long, Lena said softly, placing a hand on Mara's knee. Feared you'd run like the others. But Nora spoke of you. And Elias, he's been waiting for someone to hear. Mara's pulse steadied, the knot of fear loosening into something watchful. A cautious readiness blooming amid the doubt. She strained to listen now, not just to the stories, but to the subtle hush beyond. The faintest murmurs rising from the black dust, promising that price again. The mist pointed, insistent, toward what might be a hidden cache, buried truths waiting to uncoil. Could she heed that cost and still stand firm? With the light fading, the mist uncoiled from the furrows like breath from parched earth, thickening into a mantle that draped the fields in shifting gray. Mara paused at the edge, her boots sinking into the black dust, the air heavy with the tang of copper and decay. She had come this far, following the elders' whispers, old Tom's rheumy gaze fixed on her. Lena's shawl clutched tight as she murmured of prices unpaid. But now, as she stepped forward, the harvest shade stirred. It wasn't a shape, not yet. Just a presence. A silhouette woven from the fog itself, catching at the edges of her mind. Her thoughts snagged there, The family's hurried flight years ago, the village left to rot. Her own buried shame flickering like a half-remembered scream. The mantle held them, twisted them, and hurled them back, amplified, sharp as thorns. You abandoned us. It echoed in her skull, her mother's voice warped into accusation. The fields remember. They hunger for you. Anxiety clawed up her throat, a vice tightening her chest, urging retreat. The shade pulsed, barring the way, its tendrils brushing her skin like cold fingers. Behind her, the elders watched from the tree line. Nora's eyes narrowed, Elias gripping the hidden chronicles like a shield. The elders nodded, unseen hands in the mist urging her on. Silence had fed this shadow too long. Facing it awakened the cost of truth, the voices demanding to be heard. Could she keep her voice leashed, step through without shattering? The mantle waited, expectant. As evening gathered, the fog clung to the barn's weathered planks like a shroud, muting the dawn's gray light. Mara sat on a splintered stool, her fingers tracing the dust on the table, while Nora paced before the hearth, her shawl whispering against the floor. Elias lingered in the shadows, his gaunt frame half hidden, eyes flicking to the fields beyond the cracked window. It started with the ritual, Nora said, voice low, measured, like wind through dry stalks. We gathered at the field's heart, under the harvest moon. The elders, your grandparents among them, shaped the clay bell from the black soil itself, meant to bind us, to name the guilt we'd sown with our silence. You ring it with truth, and the land listens. Feeds on memory, not hunger. Mara's mind turned inward, the words pulling at threads she'd long buried. Guilt sown. My family fled first, didn't they? Left the bell silent, the rite unfinished. Doubt coiled in her chest, heavy as the mist outside. What if speaking it drags me under, makes me the next shade? Nora stopped, eyes sharp on Mara. Your kin interrupted it. They whispered of leaving, of forgetting the price. The bell hung there, cold in their hands, and when no full truth came, it went dead. No ring, just silence wrapping the earth in dust. She leaned closer, breath tasting of herbs and copper earth. The cache is out there still, hidden where the mist points. But it won't open without naming the emptiness they left. Your emptiness now. Say it, Mara. Voice what they wouldn't. Elias shifted, his whisper cutting the air. The fields remember. I've hidden the chronicles too long. But she's right. We need your words to lead us. Mara's thoughts raced, doubt fracturing like brittle clay. The lie I've carried? Stay away, and blame stays buried. But the shade grows stronger in silence. Her throat tightened, yet a resolve stirred, slow as roots pushing through soil. She nodded, voice emerging hesitant, then steadying. We ran from the truth. The abandonment wasn't escape. It was the first cut. My family's silence starved the right. Nora's gaze softened, pulling her in. Elias stepped forward, trust flickering in his eyes like a distant spark. Together, they turned toward the door, the mist beyond seeming to part just enough, hinting at the hidden path. The clay bell lay on the table now, unearthed from Nora's satchel, dull, unringing. Mara stared at it, fingers hovering. Am I ready to speak the lie aloud? Let it shatter into truth? And hear it toll? The question hung unanswered as the fog thickened once more. Under the cover of a night, the mist clung low over the fields like a shroud, turning the dawn into a grainy haze. Mara drove her spade into the black soil, the blade sinking with a wet, reluctant suck. Beside her, Elias labored, his gaunt arms trembling as he hacked at the earth, his breaths coming in sharp, anxious bursts. The ground resisted, clumping and clinging to the metal like fingers unwilling to release a secret. "It's fighting us," Elias muttered, wiping sweat from his brow, his eyes darting to the twisting stalks that seemed to lean closer. Deeper they dug, the hole widening into a grave for forgotten truths. Mara's heart pounded, anxiety coiling in her chest. Each scoop felt like tempting the blight itself, the soil whispering of swallowed souls. Elias paused, spade hovering. "I buried them here years ago. Feared the earth would take us both if I ever came back. The fields hunger for silence, Mara. What if it claims you now, like it did the others?" She met his gaze, the fear in it mirroring her own, but pressed on, muscles burning. The dirt yielded suddenly, a hollow thud echoing as her spade struck something solid. Together they clawed at the edges, hauling up a weathered bundle wrapped in oilcloth. As it broke free, a withered sheaf tumbled out. Brittle stalks, once golden, now twisted into a parody of harvest, crumbling in her hands like desiccated memory. Elias's hands shook as he unwrapped the chronicles, yellowed pages bound with frayed twine. "The ritual. Interrupted when your kin fled. They knew the price. Our shared guilt buried with the dead. The fields remember what we won't say." His voice cracked, admission hanging heavy, but in it, a spark of trust. She was no longer the outsider, but the one to bear this weight. Mara traced the faded ink, words of the unfinished rite blurring through the mist. Her voice, once hesitant, steadied as she read aloud. "The clay bell waits for the voice that names the wrong." Warm resolve bloomed in her chest, chasing the chill of dread. The mist stirred, parting like a guide, tendrils pointing toward the heartland's shadowed furrow. Elias nodded, standing taller beside her. "You've pulled it free. Now we face what it demands." But as the sheaf's dust settled on her skin, Mara wondered, could she carry these words through the fear, let them ring the bell and starve the shade? With the first light of a new day, the fog clung to the fields like a half-forgotten breath, thickening as Mara knelt in the furrow, her fingers tracing the cracked earth. Nora and Elias stood nearby, their shadows faint against the gray dawn, watching her sift through the unearthed chronicle, a brittle ledger of dates and omissions, its pages yellowed by years of buried silence. The air hummed with the weight of it. The ritual, interrupted a generation ago, when her family had fled without a word, leaving the village to choke on its own secrets. Doubt coiled in her chest first, sharp as the copper tang on her tongue. What if it's not me? The thought looped, insistent, pulling her gaze to the ledger's faded ink. Her mother's name there, scrawled beside the final entry. Rite halted. Price unpaid. The fog whispered then, a low murmur through the twisted stalks, carrying echoes of voices long stilled, accusations perhaps, or pleas. It shaped words she almost understood. They ran. The soil remembers. Mara's breath caught. Was this the line she feared? Her family's guilt, woven into the blight's roots, feeding the hunger that now gnawed at her own edges. She imagined the villagers' eyes on her kin, then on her. The quiet observer turned reluctant air. If I speak it, am I damning us all? The earth trembled softly beneath her palm, a pulse like a heartbeat stirring in the dust. Not violent, but insistent, rippling outward from where her fingers pressed. The mist responded, coiling denser, its edges flickering with trembling flashes. Pale glimmers that danced like half-formed memories, pointing toward the unspoken hollow in the chronicle. Nora leaned closer, her voice a rasp over the wind. Listen, girl. It's answering. Elias nodded, his gaunt face softening. the reluctance in his eyes giving way to something like trust. They saw it now, her as the bridge, the one who could voice what silence had starved. Resolve hardened in Mara, slow as the fogs retreat from her skin. No more hiding behind inherited lies. She straightened, the ledger clutched tight, her voice emerging measured, shaped by the earth's quiet demand. We left them to this. The ritual, it bound us all. The words hung, feeding the mist, which thinned just enough to reveal a shadowed path ahead. The cache's deeper secret, waiting. But the flashes lingered, questioning. Would they confirm her tie to this rotting past or pull her under? The field sighed, the tremor fading into stillness. Yet the fog's whisper promised more. At the climax of her journey, the heart of the fields lay exposed, a ragged circle of black earth where the mist clung like a shroud, thick and unyielding. Mara knelt at its center, the withered sheaf clutched in her trembling hands, its brittle stalks whispering against her palms. Nora stood beside her, shawl drawn tight, eyes fixed on the clay bell that hung from a weathered post. Dull, silent, its surface etched with faint furrows like forgotten plow lines. Elias lingered at the edge, his gaunt frame silhouetted against the creeping fog. The chronicle ledger tucked under his arm like a guilty secret finally unearthed. The harvest shade loomed just beyond the circle, a shifting silhouette of twisted stalks and hollow eyes, its pressure building in the air, heavy as the copper tang on her tongue. It pressed inward, tendrils of shadow coiling toward her chest, feeding on the unspoken. Mara's breath came shallow, anxiety knotting her throat, every pulse a reminder of the lie she'd carried. That distance could absolve her family's flight, their abandonment of the ritual that bound the soil to the village's soul. Silence would feed it more. Refusal would claim her. Nora's voice cut the wind, low and insistent. Name it, girl. The bell waits for truth, not whispers. Elias nodded, his whisper barely audible. We've buried enough. Mara's fingers tightened on the sheaf. The choice burned. Swallow the words, let the shade swallow her, or let them spill. The mist thickened, Raven's distant cries tolling like a warning. She opened her mouth, voice cracking at first, a hesitant thread in the dread-laden dawn. My family, the Ellings, she said, the name hanging like frost. We knew the rite was breaking. The blight rose when Father turned his back, when we fled without a word, leaving the voices in the dust. The words tasted of soil and regret, each one pulling at the shade's edges. Nothing. The bell remained mute, the shadow inching closer, her heart pounding against the weight. Doubt clawed. Could she name it all? The guilt they'd sown, the harvest of forgotten screams. Deeper now, her voice steadied, rising against the press. We silenced the elders' warnings, buried the ledger ourselves. I carried that lie home, thinking fields couldn't follow. The clay bell quivered, a faint tremor in the fog-shrouded air. Then, with the next breath, sincerity broke free. It was our malice, our neglect, the interrupted vow that starved the land. The bell rang, not a peal, but a clear, resonant chime, vibrating through the earth like a released sigh. The shade recoiled, its form contracting, tendrils snapping back into the mist as if scorched. Relief flooded Mara, warm against the chill, her shoulders easing as the fog began to thin, parting like a veil lifted. Nora's hand gripped her arm, firm with trust reborn. Elias stepped forward, ledger offered like a bridge. The field sighed, the mist guiding faint paths toward renewal. Yet, in the echoing ring, a question lingered in the air. What debts still trembled unspoken, waiting for the next voice to claim them? In the aftermath, the fields exhaled a hesitant dawn. the black dust yielding to threads of pale light that clawed through the thinning mist. Mara stood at the edge of the furrow, her boots sinking into soil that no longer whispered threats. Around her, the villagers gathered, shadows in shawls and worn coats, their faces etched with the weight of years unspoken. Nora's eyes, sharp as flint, met Mara's, while Elias clutched the unearthed chronicles, his gaunt hands trembling. Old Tom and Lena flanked them, roomy gazes fixed on the horizon where the harvest shade had recoiled, its silhouette fraying like old twine. Doubt hung in the air, thicker than the fog had been. "If we fall silent again," Nora murmured, her voice a rasp against the wind, "the blight will creep back. We've buried too much already." The words stirred murmurs among the others, fears of forgotten names, of souls dissolving into the earth like unharvested roots. Elias shifted, his whisper joining the chorus. "The records, they rot without voices to bind them." Their eyes turned to Mara, accusation and plea intertwined, as if her family's flight had hollowed them all. She felt the pull, the old lie crumbling. Staying away wouldn't save her from the blame. But now, the fields watched, expectant. Mara knelt, her fingers brushing the withered sheaf that lay at the furrow's lip. A brittle bundle of stalks, once golden, now cracked and hollow, mirroring the village's starved memories. She lifted it gently, the dry husks sighing in her grasp. "I will hold this," she said, her voice steadying from tremor to resolve. "Your stories, the ritual's truth, the price we paid in silence. I'll carry them, speak them, so they don't fade." The sheaf crumbled slightly in her hands, dust sifting to the soil, but she pressed on, the act sealing her oath. No more avoidance. She was the vessel now, the keeper. Relief rippled through the group like a breath released. Nora nodded, her skepticism softening to a quiet nod, while Elias extended the chronicles toward her, the weight shared at last. Old Tom's hand grazed her shoulder, Lena's shawl brushing close, a circle forming, tentative but unbroken. The fields brightened further, the mist parting to reveal green shoots piercing the black. Together, they whispered the vow, voices weaving into the wind, not from the fog's hints, but from their own eternal telling. Yet, as the light strengthened, a shadow of question lingered in Mara's chest. Without the mist's nudge, would her promise alone sustain the memory, or would silence reclaim them all?